then I joined like in an informal call, and it's like, oh, it's a little crazy.
All right, we are now recording. Let's go and get started. I want to thank our sponsors as usual, Hacker Lab, who we are unable to meet at due to COVID-19, but we will be back at. Looking forward to seeing you all again in person soon. Intervision and Liatrio. Tonight's event, we got Mike. Hey, Mike. No, I'm sorry. Next week, we've got Mike.
Next month, yeah.
Hey, Mike. All right, Mike, are you on the call? Mike's not on the call. Mike will be joining us next month to talk through DynamoDB for developers. Encourage you all to come out and hear what he's got to say. Sounds like it'll turn into a pretty fantastic talk. Got a couple of cool things lined up after that as well. So excited what the calendar's starting to look like. 4 announcements I wanted to run through real quick. Just yesterday, announcement for CDK support with Kubernetes. Not sure how I feel about this. I've kind of got a love-hate relationship with CDK right now, but I'm really excited when Blake is going to sign up to talk about it. I don't think Blake's on, but going to need to poke him.
I'm sure he just had a convulsion after you said that.
Right on. All right. All right. Well, Eric, you got to let him know that.
I'll break the good news to him. He did tweet about it, so he's on the hook.
Cool. All right. For those that are looking at doing the Solution Architects exam, there's a new exam readiness course that just was announced today that looks pretty good for prepping for that. The Graviton 2 processors just went GA. I was a part of the beta for that. I got to tell you, these instances are fantastic. They advertise a 40% price performance benefit over traditional Intel chips. I'm not sure about that, but we did see better performance than equally instance classed Intel-based chips with these, and there is a cost reduction. So I can definitely confirm that there is a price performance benefit. Not sure exactly how to hit those 40% numbers, but pretty excited about that. Now you do have to get your app to compile to ARM, so there's that minor caveat there, but this is a really exciting development with AWS. And then last, I don't know if anybody's using Amazon Macy. It's a service to look for any data that might be leaked through your like S3 buckets. And it sounded like a great service, but very expensive. So a lot of challenge with adopting the service just because of the price. There's an 80 to 90% reduction that was announced yesterday on the service. So if you've ever considered using Macy for doing analysis of your buckets for any data loss or PII, PHI type stuff in your buckets, but didn't because of the pricing, I would give it another look now.
At such a great rate, Casey, it'd be a great opportunity for someone to do a test drive and then do a talk about that. That would be outstanding.
No pressure, everybody.
None whatsoever, right?
So AWS Summit obviously got canceled because of COVID, but they did offer this online summit. And what's cool is it's also on demand. So if you missed the live part of the event, you can go back and watch any of the talks. I would encourage folks to check it out. There's some actually pretty cool material that came out from this. So just wanted to make a call out for this, that this is there. So give that a look. I didn't put a link, but just Google AWS Summit online, you'll find it. Did anybody watch any of these? Anybody have any events that they want, any talks they want to call out that were good? All right. Last thing is I wanted to call out real quick a project that I've been working on, and I'm asking for volunteering help. I've done most of the heavy lifting to get the site off the ground, but I'm looking for some help with ongoing of the site. So somebody reached out to me. They wanted to build this network of therapists that could offer free and low cost therapy sessions to frontline workers, either hospital workers or folks in grocery stores and whatnot that are struggling with all the craziness going on for them. And it So I built the site. I built it on AWS Amplify, which is a combination of AppSync, Lambda, and Dynamo, just because it's dirt cheap. Cost me about 20 cents a day to run this site, and can scale to whatever. And we got about 3,000 therapists signed up pretty quick, and we're helping about 200 people a day right now are getting connected with therapy sessions. So it's written in React. This was my first go with React. I mean, it looks ugly. I'm not a front end guy, but the site, it's up, it works, it's pretty cool, but could use some help. If anyone's like, hey, I've got some experience with some of this tech, or I'd like to go deep in it, just let me know. Would love to get you connected. The code is all online. I could share a link. It's all open source, but you could see how the app was built. Talking about maybe in a future, just walking through how the site was built, because it was pretty fun using this stack, and it's extremely inexpensive for building these types of sites. But yeah, check it out. If it's something that you'd be interested in helping, this is the admin site. Probably shouldn't share that. It's got therapist information on it. But yeah, let me know. And last, if you're not on Slack, get on our Slack, sac-tech.herokuapp.com, and then join the SAC AWS channel. I'm going to call this out every single month because Slack is the way that we want to keep in touch between meetings. So I'm going to just pause for a minute and give folks a chance to type that in. More awkward pause. All right, time.
Perhaps we could add that.
You want.
Casey, remind me to just add that to the description of the YouTube video. We can just put that in there as well. Yep.
Right on. Actually, I'll drop a link in the Zoom chat too. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brendan O'Leary, Senior Evangelist at GitLab, to take it over from here. Thank you, Brendan, for joining us.
Great, yeah, and thanks for having me today. Coming to you all the way from the right coast, or the coast that's on the right. So thanks for letting me join. Probably would have never gotten to meet you all and come to the meetup if it hadn't been for all this. So minor positive. Really excited to talk to you all today. I'm going to talk a little bit about a little bit of serverless, a little Lambda, a little SAM. I'm sure at least some of that you all have heard of. And I'm going to talk a little bit about applying CI/CD, like best practices, when looking at apps that are serverless, right? Because a lot of times folks I've met talk about, this desire to have serverless as part of their stack, but then, quickly it can get a little out of hand how to actually then manage it, right? Because now we've got this dozens or hundreds of functions out there. So talk a little bit about that. So I won't kill you with slides. We're actually going to probably spend most of the time in the terminal in a second, but we'll start off just with a little overview for anyone that isn't familiar. And also feel free to interrupt me. Let me grab chat up too before I get too deep into this. Questions are obviously a lot more fun. I love hearing myself talk, but it's a lot more engaging and helpful if we can all chat as we go. I'm just trying to get Zoom chat to show up for me, which it doesn't want to do. Well, just unmute yourself and speak up. I can't get the chat for some reason. So yeah, my name is Brendan O'Leary. I'm a senior developer evangelist at GitLab. I've been at GitLab since 2017. You can get me on the Twitter at O'Leary Crew if you want to chat about any of this afterwards, or have any questions after the presentation today. And like I said, today I'm going to talk a little bit about SAM. And I'm not sure how many folks have heard of SAM. I'm sure everyone's heard of Lambda. But SAM is this serverless application model that AWS has come up with. It's kind of somewhere between just having a plain Lambda and having a full AWS Amplify stack running. And it comes with its own CLI that's really valuable because it lets you do a lot of local testing and then actually lets you deploy to AWS. And so you get to have this kind of simplified template that defines what resources you need. And so that can be the Lambda serverless functions that you're defining. but it also can be any other piece of AWS infrastructure that might be related to your app, because what it's going to output from that is actually behind the covers. We'll see is actually outputs a cloud formation stack in the end from the much more simplified version of the SAM template code, and then it also automatically deploys and configures that end IAM, which is my favorite part because I'm really bad at IAM. And so getting started is really easy. We're actually going to run through all of this, so I won't spend too long. One thing I'll note here before we dive in is, the support, of course, for all of the languages that Lambda supports. So today I'll be doing Node.js, but of course you could do the same thing that we're going to see here with Python or Ruby or any of those other languages. And again, it lets you, it initiates that project directory from that template that you select, creates kind of, a hello world Lambda function, and then lets you run it locally, which I just remember, it downloads a Docker container, which means I'm going to need Docker running for the demo later. So I'm going to start Docker up while I'm talking. Okay, so then it lets you build up the application package. So SAM build actually builds down that template to a full CloudFormation stack with all of the IAM capabilities, bucket to upload everything to, and all of the functions and other resources it's going to create. And then it'll actually guide you through deployment as well, or enable you to deploy automatically. And we'll see that in a second. And so that gives you, a public URL that you can then go hit, and it hits your Lambda function and says hello world, right? Like every good demo does. But I wanted to talk a little bit more about what like a real world application would look like. And so I've got a demo app here that actually, I feel like I'm worried the URL may have changed because I rearranged things. So we're going to see gitlab.com/Brendan demo. Oh, AWS SAM is still there. Okay, great. So this is a demo app I made, which kind of is a full code thing, but we're going to build one from scratch in just a minute. So we don't necessarily need that. But if you want to take a look later, you can. And the idea of that kind of more real world app is serverless dad jokes. So, if you wanted to know how you got the code for the bank vault, you could check out their branch. And so that's not only a dad joke, but a Git related dad joke, which is probably should be my specialty at this point, considering I'm both a dad and an evangelist at GitLab. But what this project does is shows you how you can bring in other AWS resources like DynamoDB and easily connect them to your Lambda functions using SAM. And so the beauty of this project is it kind of wires all of this up for you without you kind of having to, figure out what IAM permissions do I need to give to this Lambda function so it can get at this DynamoDB. It's just all wrapped up in that one SAM template. And from that SAM template, I then created two Lambda functions, one to create a new dad joke that goes into DynamoDB, and then get excuse me, a random dad joke out of that DynamoDB instance. But again, I think the real question becomes, okay, that's great. Now we've got more of a real world type application, right? One that's not just completely stateless with Lambda, but also has, a stateful side with DynamoDB. But I think a big question mark then becomes, how do we bring, production grade CI/CD to that application? And so that's what we're going to kind of walk through next, and we'll spend some time in the terminal doing that. But the steps are pretty basic. We're going to want to automate that testing deployment. So what we'll see that SAM does is it does a great job of, again, getting me started on my laptop. I can get a project started, get it deployed to AWS, and get going really quickly with that. But the thing that happens next is if I want to be able to share that code or collaborate on it with others, now I'm going to want to have a consistent way that it gets deployed and not rely on my laptop with my AWS credentials there to deploy it every time. So we'll create a GitLab CI YAML to do that for us. We'll load our credentials in as CI/CD variables. So there's a couple different ways to get AWS credentials into GitLab CI/CD, but we're going to use the specific method of making them CI/CD variables. And then we're going to leverage only and except to control the deployment. So these are ways that we can say what jobs in our CI/CD pipeline are we going to run when. So for instance, deploying the actual application to production, we might only want to have happen after code is merged to master, or once we've tagged a release. And so another thing that I've done to start off is I'm getting really meta with our build. So because I am a amateur programmer and I like to program stuff in Node.js when I'm trying to throw things together, and I program this in Node.js, I need Node.js to build my application. Well, Sam relies on Python, so I needed Python and Node.js. So I found an image, a Docker image that has both, because at its core, GitLab CI/CD is going to run all of my jobs inside of a Docker image. So that's a really great thing when it comes to like making sure my builds are ephemeral and don't rely on having a computer set up that is exactly right and hasn't changed from someone else messing with it. Right, that's the beauty of it being in a Docker image, but it also means I need to ship all of the things that I need in order to make my build. And so for the first step, we'll see we're actually going to build our Docker image that we need, because there's no existing Docker image, a Docker Hub image that has Python, Node.js, and the SAM CLI. But with GitLab CI/CD, I can build that image first and then use that image for the rest of my build. So we'll take a look at that. And then again, so typically the SAM CLI looks the same place that the AWS CLI, general AWS CLI does, right? It looks in your user for your AWS credentials. But just like the AWS CLI, it can also use environmental variables for an access key and a secret access key to authenticate to AWS. And so GitLab CI/CD also provides the ability to set environmental variables. And so here you can see I've set, and again, we're going to run through all this in a second, but I've set the AWS access and secret key here. And then I've marked them both as protected and masked. So those are just two different layers of protection. Protected means I'm only going to pass this variable to the environment on protected branches. So if someone, a developer who doesn't have the right to run code on master, makes a branch and a suggestion, they won't be able to extract these keys. It's only when we have merged safe code into the master branch or a protected branch that this code will get run. And then masked is just a simple layer of protection. It says if someone accidentally, echoes this out to the command line, just mask it if you see that in the logs. So it's not super sophisticated, but it's a simple way of like preventing accidental leaks of these into your logs. And so the CI YAML file we'll end up with, and again, this is so that I have my cheat sheet for later, but is kind of got these three simple steps. So GitLab's CI pipelines are defined in a YAML file, and we'll see all this in the UI in a second. And then each of these YAML sections is what we call a job. And the first job is actually the longest, and that's just the one that's building my build image. So remember, I said it was very meta. It's just getting that Docker file that brings together Python, Node.js, and the SAM CLI, and pushing it to my GitLab registry, so that I can then use it, as you see in the image tag for the next two, validate and deploy prod jobs. And so I actually only run that Docker build job when there's a change to the Docker file. That way I don't have to run that every time, but if I change the Docker file, we'll get a new version of the build image. And then in the validate job, I'm just running that in the stage test. So by default, the stages are build, test, and deploy, but I can customize those stages if I want. And that's just running a SAM validate that just ensures that it is a valid SAM template. Of course, I might have a few more sophisticated tests than that if I was going to make production level code, but for now we'll just do that. And then I'm running my SAM build and deploy. But that I'm only running on the master branch. So again, we're going to go build this from scratch next, but that's kind of the overview. Now would be a great time if you have any questions. I kind of went pretty quick through all of that. I wanted to dive into the terminal, but if you have questions, I can handle them now. Awesome. Great. All right. So next, let's dive in. So first, the intro to what we're building, we kind of did that. And so that's here. So getting everything set up, I've already got the AWS CLI and the SAM CLI installed. Of course, I can go to AWS's documentation to find out how to do that. I also put this note for myself here at Docker to remember to get Docker running. And then, of course, I have my AWS account set up, and I've logged into it with the AWS CLI so that my credentials are on my laptop. So now if we're going to start a new project, and I can zoom this in, hopefully it's all right for y'all there. If I'm going to start a new project, I'm just in my AWS folder here. And if we look at the SAM CLI command, we can see it has this init option. That's what we saw earlier. And so I'm going to run that. And that's going to ask me what template I want to start from. Do I want to start from one of the AWS Quick Start templates, or do I want to start from one of some custom template location? So if you were in a large enterprise and wanted to build, have a bunch of teams start using this, you could build your own custom templates, but I just want to get started with one of AWS's Quick Start templates. And so here we see that list of all the different languages that are supported. Again, I'm just going to go with Node 12 because that's the easiest thing for me to remember how to code in. And we'll just give the project a name. And it's going to clone that from their GitHub link that has the actual template. So that's where you could see, what is comprised of a template. Clones that into a new folder here and creates, the simple hello world. So after that, we can just go into that directory that it created. And then I can actually already run the hello world function that it made. And so I'm just going to run this just so you can see how it works. And then we'll go into code editor so you can see all the stuff that's going on behind it. So here we're saying SAM local invoke our hello world function, and we're passing this event JSON that came with the project. So if we run that, we'll actually see that it creates the Lambda handler for Node.js. It's updating the Docker Lambda image on my computer, which will take it a second. And then once it's done that, it will go ahead and run. And normally I didn't run this earlier today. Normally if I run it once a day, maybe the Docker image stays up to date, but they're updating it often. So right now I'm just downloading a Docker image. Okay, then it put my Hello World folder into that container and ran that request with this event JSON and got back this status code of 200 with Hello World. So if we want to take a little look at that in more detail, I didn't mean to click code that. That's not what I wanted. I opened a file named comma rather than opening that folder. Great. All righty. Just lining up my windows. Okay. So if we look at that hello world function, it's a pretty simple Lambda function, right? In here, it exports one thing called Lambda handler, which is an async function that just basically responds with, creates a response with the status code 200 and the message that we wanted, and then returns that response. And then the event that we sent to it was just some event JSON that they sent over with the project. Again, it's just a kind of like if you were going to post data, this is what post data would look like to a Lambda function. And then the SAM portion comes in with this template.yaml. So this template is the SAM template, and it's a much less. You'll notice if any of you have ever messed with large CloudFormation templates, it's a much less verbose description of what we're deploying here. And so basically, we just have the one resource of the hello world function, and that resource is what is going to be handled by that app.lambda handler in the path of hello world. And so that with that simple description, we're actually able to instantiate the entirety of that Lambda function and understand and run that Lambda function within the local Docker container. Now, the other option we have for running locally, so we saw the ability to invoke a single function with a set of JSON sent to it, but we can also run the entire local API. So if we had multiple functions or a number of other things, we can actually run SAM local start API, and it will run all the functions in a web server on our local port. So now it's only has the one endpoint that we specified, but we can now go and see that endpoint. So if we go to Firefox and we go localhost 3000/hello, in theory, great. Yep. So we get that hello world message there. So that that really makes local development a lot easier, right? Because now I can kind of debug and understand my Lambda functions a lot easier. And I think it actually does like a live reload. So if I added something in, like if I added a console log in here, and I went and refreshed this page, then in my terminal, I think I said it like it's going to work. Yep. Oh, there it is. Great. Yeah. So here we can see the log message that actually came up. So it does a live reload of the function, and allows me to do a lot more local debugging than just pushing it to Lambda and then reading some logs to figure out what happened. So that's fantastic for local development. But of course, the next thing I want to do is be able to deploy the package. So step one in that is to run SAM build, which is going to compile the code and run the build, whatever build process needs to happen for the language you're using, and then output that build artifact as well as the full CloudFormation template. And then if I say SAM deploy guided, whoops, I can't type, deploy guided, like it asked me to, whoops, still can't type, then it's actually going to walk me through, okay, so what do I want this stack to be named? And again, I could just say stack meetup. And where do I want to deploy it? USD Swan, of course. Where else do you deploy anything? Confirm changes before deploy. No. Allow it to create IAM roles. Yes, because I don't want to do that myself. Save arguments to sam config.toml. That's really helpful because that means the next run of this deploy, it'll actually remember all of those answers that I made or gave it, and be able to deploy it unattended. So, oh, well, it's going to run a full CloudFormation template against it now. And it's going to take it just a second. While it's loading, I can log into AWS. Maybe I can log into AWS. Hold on a second. I'm going to bad time with my password. Of course, I don't know my own password because 1Password. So hold on just 1 second here. I was hoping to beat it, but I'm probably not going to now. So if we go to CloudFormation, it's probably already going to be there. I was hoping to show it not there and then show it there. Yep. Okay. So we can see that it was just created though. This SAC Meetup stack. And so that is the full CloudFormation stack that it created from that small SAC, the small SAM template that we saw. So like if we look at the template for the CloudFormation, we can see, again, it's much more verbose than it would have been otherwise. And if we go back to our terminal, we'll see that one of the outputs it gives us is actually the production live endpoint. So this is the live endpoint on US East 1, which of course isn't going to be that exciting, but is going to say hello world, just like my local copy did. So that's really great. But in the next, I've got my counter, I've got maybe about 5 minutes left. I'd like to get it running in GitLab CI/CD. So the key of what I want to do there is I'm going to have to first start a Git repository, of course. And then there's a Git ignore that comes with the template, but it doesn't ignore the build. And I want to ignore the build because I want to run that each time. I don't want to commit that actually to my repository. So I'm going to ignore that AWS-SAM folder that we saw, which is where the compiled code ends up. And then if I look at Git status, it just has my code and the templates, but it also has that SAM config.toml, which is great because that means it's going to remember how to deploy. So I'm going to say git add everything and commit it. And then I can just actually add my remote because of the beauty of GitLab, even though I don't have a remote created yet. If I just say, if I act as if there is a remote, and I say push, because even when it's not there, GitLab knows I have the ability to create repositories in that namespace and actually creates a repository for me. So, of course, here's that repository. It starts off as private, but I will make it public so that you all can see it when we're done. So step 1, I'm going to do that. And then let's take a look at the repository. Okay, great. All right. So next, I'm going to go back to my cheat sheet and make sure I'm doing the right things. All right. I am going to open this in the web IDE in GitLab. So GitLab also comes with a web IDE, which just shipped dark mode, which makes me really happy. I can't wait for it in the rest of the thing. But I'm going to add to GitLab here a GitLab CI YAML. So again, the GitLab CI YAML is where we're going to configure the pipeline we want to run. And most of the time that assumes that you're in Docker, right? Like the free GitLab runners that you get with GitLab.com, or just Docker, assume a Docker image and then spin that Docker image up and run the build and then delete the image afterwards. The GitLab runner actually could be installed anywhere. So I could install the runner on my computer if I wanted, or install it in my, most of the time what people will do in production is I'll want to install a runner inside my VPC so that GitLab doesn't even have to reach into the VPC at all for the deploy. It just lets me do it. It goes out and gets the code instead. So for the build job, I'm going to do that in stage deploy. Well, it's actually going to be build and deploy. So we're going to call that job. And in that script section, basically anything that I can do in my CLI, I can make automated within GitLab. So the two things I'm going to have to do first is I've got to add in the SAM CLI. So again, we saw earlier in the presentation that I was making a Docker image for that. I'm not going to go through all that effort because I've only got a couple minutes left, but I can just install the SAM CLI, and then I can run SAM build and SAM deploy, right? So that's the same steps I took on my laptop, although it's installing the SAM CLI every day. I'm going to commit right to master because I'm a professional developer. And I don't need to test my code, right? It's amazing. Add CSCD. Awesome. So that's been committed to master, and then I can go take a look at the pipeline that got kicked off from that. And we'll see that there's only the one stage and the one job, but that job is going to go, download that Docker image and run all of that. Now, the thing that you might be saying is, and the thing that I'm going to assume that you're saying, because again, I'm a little short on time here, is that, well, how's it going to authenticate to AWS? And well, the reality is it's not going to be able to.
Hey,
So
Brendan.
actually,
Brendan, I just want to let you know we're fine on time. So.
Oh, are we? Okay.
Yeah,
Sorry, I had a little clock on. Okay.
No, don't worry about it, man. Just keep
Cool.
rolling. You're doing great.
Yeah. Okay. So, well, then we can watch this fail. The point is, I wrote that code, which was going to be great, but it's going to fail, and then we'll talk about how we're going to fix it. Thanks. I appreciate that, Casey. So it's again, it'd be better to set up that Docker image, and I can go through how we do that in a second. But even without that, it's just going to go ahead and install it, which is fine. It just makes the build take a little bit longer. And then, come on. All right, so we see the SAM build, which should hopefully pass. And then the SAM deploy is going to fail. And the reason it failed is because I didn't give it any ability to deploy into my account. So the way we're going to fix that is we're going to add my keys right in here. Now, am I going to do that while I'm sharing with you? Probably not, but I will show you where it goes. So right in here is where I can add any variable to become an environmental variable in my CI/CD jobs. And by default, it actually knows about AWS stuff, of course. So I'm going to put my access key in here.
So Brendan, you're just injecting them as parameters to your pipeline, right?
Exactly. Yep. So those become just the environmental variables in my pipeline. And I'm going to just do that off screen real quick. I mean, I know we're all friends here, but it's just never great to live stream and then put on YouTube your AWS credentials.
Yeah, you don't want that on YouTube.
All right. And I've just got to go get them first. So I'm just doing that on my other monitor. So yeah, so the way you'd probably do this in a production environment would be different, right? You might use like our integration with like a HashiCorp Vault to go and create a temporary key that's only valid for one run or for 5 minutes or whatever your settings are for Vault. But for the sake of a demo, I like to just do it the easy way, which is to just put it in as. And I mean, I do this for myself, for my own, quote unquote production apps. But if I was really doing something for the company I worked for, I would do it different. Great. So now I've got those variables in here, right? And those will get injected into the environment. So to run it again, I can just say, go to my pipelines and say run. And go ahead and say run for the master branch. And while that one's running, we'll take a look at a more complex pipeline, since we got a very simple Hello World demo going on. So, for instance, if we looked at how GitLab builds GitLab with GitLab, which is as meta as it sounds, we could see what like a much more complex pipeline might look like. So if we just go to the pipelines there for the GitLab project, you can already see that it's going to be slightly more complex. So here we've got a very complex GitLab CI/CD file that you can see is it's actually running 200 jobs per every run. And so that involves, preparing and compiling assets together, running a lot of different tests. You can see there's quite a few tests, and even this, like there's, these unit tests in our spec actually have even subjobs that are even longer. And then we're going to run code coverage and create a review app and run quality assurance against all of those things. And so you can end up with a much more complex set of pipelines, obviously, than the simple one job that deploys to AWS, Hello World application. But the other beauty of GitLab is it provides for you to have actually know CI code and still be able to deploy. So we've for a long time been heavily invested in Kubernetes, and one thing that we have, and I'm just trying to find the example of that, is what's called auto DevOps. So if you've got your project connected to a Kubernetes cluster, GitLab can actually automatically build and deploy that. So this is a Node.js project that's slightly more complex project, but does not have any CI/CD file. And that actually runs what's called our auto DevOps pipeline, which you can kind of think of, it's similar in a lot of ways to Heroku. In fact, the build step is very similar to Heroku. So we use build packs. There used to be Heroku-ish build packs, and now there's a different set of open source cloud native build packs to detect the language and run a build. And then we automatically run a number of tests against that. So again, based on the language we detected, we can run like code quality scans from open source code quality scanners. We can run static code analysis. We can run your unit tests. And then we actually can deploy it automatically into a Kubernetes cluster. And so I'm not going to get real deep into that today. But it's interesting to say that we also have the ability to deploy without any CI code, and run that when it's within a Kubernetes cluster. And then the other thing that I like to say about that, if that interests you, is the beauty of it is that it's not a black box that does that. It's actually a really complex GitLab CI YAML. So we actually expose to you exactly how auto DevOps works. So this is actually the CI YAML that runs when you don't have one, that does the automatic build. And so unlike Heroku, where when you graduate from it, you've got to go re-architect everything in AWS, you can slowly graduate from this automatic deployment pipeline to a more complex one. And that was mostly killing times for my deploy. Oh, here we go. Great. So now we can see that it successfully ran because I had the right AWS credentials in the environment and ran the new function. I guess the real way to show that it works would be to change something. So this says hello world. I could say, instead, change something about it to say, I did that console log message, but I could change that to actually be what it sends out. Again, straight to master, like the professionals do. And we'll see a new pipeline run for that. And then when that's done, we'll see that successfully deployed. But that's the basics of what I wanted to show today. But again, I'd love to, I went really quick through a lot of it. I'd love to talk through questions that folks have, or things I can answer about what we just looked at.
Hey, Brendan, this is Eric. Coming from an old school Jenkins world where you would have dedicated build executors, I'm supposing you could basically have a dedicated EC2 instance, maybe running a build executor, just using IAM roles instead of injecting the access code and secret key.
Exactly. Yep. So that's what a lot of folks will do, is have a dedicated runner that's like an EC2 instance. The other thing you can do is you can, if we talk about auto scaling, the GitLab runner in AWS, is we actually have the ability to natively auto scale. Well, right now we use a thing called Docker Machine. So you could have a runner Bastion host, like a really small EC2 instance that doesn't have a whole lot of power, right? It's like a T2 micro or whatever, that actually will spawn new EC2 instances to run the jobs with whatever IAM roles you specify that it has the rights to create, right? So you can actually specify the details of the machines it's going to create. The beauty of this is it means you can auto scale your build platform to go up and down with demand. Of course, you could build that yourself in an auto scaling group, right? With IAM policy, the same story. But this is kind of like an easier, in my mind, or a more controlled
These
way.
could be short-lived instances based off of each job that got spawned.
Exactly. And so that's actually what we do on GitLab.com. Now we do it in GCP, but the principle is the same. We spawn an instance of a new virtual machine, whatever they call it, run the job, and then destroy it immediately after. Or you could have like in Jenkins, you have to have the compute like sitting around, right? Well, okay, you could build yourself auto scaling groups with Jenkins too, but so you could have the compute sitting around, right? That might be necessary in some environments, right? You might have to have, a very specific kind of instance to do a very specific kind of build. But wherever possible, you can also just leverage auto scaling. The other beauty of like our auto scaling is it lets you somewhere, I think, spot. Yeah, so you can leverage spot instances too, right? Because this is like CI jobs. It's like, theoretically, it's a lot of not, if your unit tests need to run twice, like, okay, so be it. So you can save a lot of cost by like having it bid automatically for spot instances as part of that auto scaling.
Hey, Brendan, if you're running GitLab in AWS outside of GitLab.com, if you're doing your own hosted in EC or in AWS, what was I going to say? Would it be worth using EKS or ECS to run the back end Docker container build execute or the runners? Is there any integration there? Or is that just...
So there you can also use EKS to have like Kubernetes in general is another way to auto scale runners. So you could do it that way. The more interesting thing we just released, which I actually haven't played with yet, is we released a Fargate native runner. I mean, of course, if you're running a lot of workloads on EKS already, maybe that makes sense. But we also just released like this month this native Fargate runner that lets you deploy tasks into Fargate, which
great. Would you mind copy and paste that in the chat?
Not a problem. I would love to. And it's actually, like I said, it's not something I've been wanting to mess with it, and I haven't yet. I had found and then lost Zoom chat again. I use Zoom every day, but they updated, and now the windows are slightly different. I'm going to stop sharing just for a second to do that. Great. So yeah, that I'm really excited about that. That comes with a custom executor. We have this concept of the GitLab runner executor, like how is it executing the code, or how is it setting up the build environment to then go execute the code. And that, had traditionally been like Docker and Docker machine and, just shell to write out to the shell. But we extended that to have a custom executor, which means that folks have built a lot of really cool stuff. And we're now building cool stuff on top of it too, like just natively set up a Fargate environment to run a job. I know a lot of folks that are running high performance computing jobs with that too, because there's a lot of high performance computing environments are very different than what we're all used to. And so, yeah, it's a really, it's not something I've had a chance to try. It would be a good thing to show an AWS meetup if I had, but I would definitely recommend taking a look and giving us feedback because it's brand new.
Hey, Brendan, I've got a couple questions for you. So I'll be honest with you. I'm not a GitLab CI user that often.
Hmm.
I'm far more on the Jenkins and code pipeline world these days. But I do have I have ran across a couple concerns. Can you, like you can in Jenkins or code pipeline, have CI pipelines that aren't tied to code bases, that aren't tied to actual repositories?
That's a good question. So the short answer is no, but the long answer is yes. The short answer is no. We do tie it to projects one to one, but Jenkins does too, right? Like Jenkins has this concept of project, but that doesn't have to have a source code, right? That doesn't have to have like a code project behind it. But like Jenkins has a unit of job or project, or I'm not sure exactly the word it uses,
Got a
right?
file declaration of the pipeline, but it doesn't necessarily have an entire repository that you can push to, right? Like that's
Right,
that's
right.
the difference is you don't is there plans to support that?
No, I would say that we postulate that you should, even if you were doing something that wasn't like, if you were running a job that was like a scheduled thing, or you were running a job that was code agnostic, or you were running a job that brought together 3 different applications to deploy them, right? Uh, our position would be, even if it's just the configuration, you should put that in source control, right? So no, but people use it in a lot of very interesting ways where you don't have to tie it to the code base, right? Like it doesn't have to be tied to the code base of it, but it does have to be a CI file in a repository. But maybe that's the only thing. And so there's a lot of options around like parent-child pipelines that people use a lot. So a pattern that's very often done is let development teams, build their application, but then I'm responsible for deploying it. And so I'm the DevOps team, or I've got some other title. I'm going to have my repository that's basically just the CI code or just the CD code, right? How do we deploy this thing? And so that would still be a repository, yes, but it can be completely separate from the code of the application we're deploying, if that makes sense. But we are very like, I would say we're probably not going to ever have like a UI where you type a file in that's not a project, like a Jenkins order, like a lot of like a point and click without. Even if we did those things, it would just be abstracting away the fact that it's in source control, because like we strongly believe in source controlling that configuration. If that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. One more question on this line. So, and this is I'll be honest about this one. This is coming from a third party that I don't know. So, it sounds like plugins or extensions for GitLab CI are there third party available plugins, kind of like what you see for Jenkins. Jenkins has a ton, as you know,
Mm-hmm.
of like vendor integrations.
Mm-hmm.
Does that exist currently for GitLab CI?
Again, I would say short answer no. So we've been very anti. We have not wanted to rebuild the plugin marketplace that Jenkins has, and we've been very intentional in not rebuilding that. I'm biased because I came from a world where I inherited a Jenkins instance that still gives me nightmares to this day. The story I tell about that Jenkins instance is, again, I inherited it, and so I like inherited like your traditional like pipe. Like I came in as like the first director of DevOps at a federal contractor, and inherited like Jira to GitLab to Jenkins to Nexus and Artifactory. For some reason, nobody could ever explain to me why we had both, but we had both.
Were you at DHS?
No, it wasn't DHS. It was actually the Department of Defense. Even better, right? This makes you feel real good inside. It's okay. It was just SOCOM, Special Operations. So it's not like it was a big deal. Anyway, and the worst part of the worst experience I had there was, how tools in Jenkins are like a free text named, or at least they were when I was using Jenkins. Someone had installed, and then I don't know how many Java developers we have on, but there's kind of 2 different compilers for Java, right? There's the JRE, there's like the open source Java, and then there's like the Oracle Java, JRE, JDK. And someone had, I can't remember exactly which way it was, but someone had installed one and named it the other. And we had a thing that would compile in one and not the other. And that took a long time to troubleshoot. We ended up having to like SHA the binary on the server, which was really not fun. So after that experience and the experience of like having to support this team, because it was a contractor, right? So like we had all these different contracts, and it's like this team needed the Jenkins set up like exactly this way and this plugin, but that plugin isn't available in this version of Jenkins, where when we updated that, it broke and all of that. So I personally am biased against the plugin marketplace too, just to be honest. And we've intentionally not rebuilt that. I think, you know, the benefit that we had in GitLab CI, or that again, I'm biased towards the fact that I like it, and I moved that whole group. I got to a point with that group where I was like, if you want my team's help, we'll help you learn GitLab CI. It's great. If your Jenkins jobs work, fantastic. Like, good for you. If they break, I'll give you the SSH access and you can try and fix it yourself. So again, I was biased before I even worked for GitLab. I was biased for GitLab CI, but I think it's mostly a product of timing. Like GitLab CI came around, like it'd be nice to say we're smarter than them or something, but like I don't think that's what it is. It's just we came up in a time where Docker was like had kind of won, and because of that, like everything was very Docker first, right? And so there's lots of ways that you can just say like, oh, don't get an AWS plugin, get the Docker container that has the AWS CLI and run the 3 AWS commands, and own it yourself. And I think that makes it harder to get started, but easier to maintain, if that makes sense. And I think we just have decided to stay on that route for a long time. Like a group that, again, I used to run CI as a product manager before I was a developer evangelist. So again, super biased for our CI probably. But to compare, to be fair to like competition, like Circle CI does a really cool thing called orbs, right? So Circle CI also grew up in the time of Docker, very Docker based, very fast, right? Very good at being fast. And they have this thing called orbs that I think is really interesting. It's like kind of somewhere between a plugin and a Docker image world. I've always thought that we needed to go down that road. We're going down the road of like tighter integrations. So like you'll see in GitLab 13.0 that comes out on the 22nd, like a number of first-class integrations with Terraform. We've done a number of first-class integrations with Vault. We want those integrations to be first-class and owned and supported by us, which again, slower to get started, better in maintenance, right? So it just means there's less of a marketplace. Anyway, that's the whole story, but that's where we're at.
Awesome. Thanks for addressing that.
Yeah, no problem. Awesome. And then my deploy did work, just, to show the demo works, right? The demo gods are with me today. I put that in the chat too. Just changing my message. Any other questions I can answer? Again, happy to talk about all of my personal biases against different tools.
Hey, it's Kumar here. Like Jenkins, can we have like a variables layer where we can share the variables like different stages? Do we have anything like in GitLab CI? Because I was trying for in my office, like I'm trying to set up where I couldn't share the variables between the stages.
Yeah, so there's a couple different ways you can do that. One, you could, if you're not manipulating it, you saw that I could have that variable that's shared across, if it's like a static variable. If it's something you need to manipulate, there's two different ways to do that. So I didn't talk about it. There's cache and there's artifacts. So the cache, they're very similar, right? It's like, what's the path or things that I need to like pass along. And the major difference is that artifacts are meant to live past my pipeline, whereas like the cache is like for the life of the pipeline. So the difference here would be like a cache might be, my node modules, right? Like again, I'm going to run home to mama node.js, right? I might run my build stage and, I'm doing my npm install there. And then I'm going to cache my node modules so that I can go do tests and all kinds of other stuff without having to run that every time. Artifacts, again, are meant to outlive the job. So if I'm, talking about that pattern I was talking about where I might build the code in one repository and then trigger a pipeline in the deploy repository, or be polling from that deployed repository. Then I might put an artifact that is, the output, the jar of the job or something like that. So those are the two options for kind of passing data between jobs and stages. And then I also put a link to the docs on migrating from Jenkins. I know there's a lot of work being done on that, so I would stay tuned. I'm trying to find that there's an issue out there somewhere where we want to be able to just kind of import or wrap Jenkins file implementation to like let you play with GitLab CI and see what's different. But that isn't in this documentation, but at least the documentation kind of has like, what is the difference between like what's a declarative Jenkins file versus a YAML file, and how do I kind of map the two together? Like the brain map of the two different worlds.
Yeah, I got a question for you, Brennan.
Mm-hmm.
So one thing that always drives me crazy with CI systems is the feedback loop. So I do a lot with GitHub Actions, and I was annoyed with the process of like, hey, I want to test an update to my YAML file, commit push, commit push, commit push, commit push. So I ended up creating a small CLI to allow me to run GitHub Actions locally. Is there anything like that for GitLab? Is there the ability to do like a local run of that YAML file and get fast feedback?
Yeah, there used to be. So there used to be the ability to run there is an execute command on the GitLab runner. It's technically not supported anymore. I think the route we've gone with that is expecting folks to do more of that push, but I think it's more like, developing a pattern where that's simpler. So for instance, like we saw the web ID, I didn't show it, but like that's directly tied to the pipeline. I can see my pipeline results right next to me in the web ID. Maybe I can pull that up. And then it's funny because a colleague of mine just gave a great answer to this like exact question on Twitter today. And I want to like go read that because I remember reading it and thinking, oh, that's the right way to say that.
Do you get people asking for that a lot? Is this a made up problem maybe?
No, it's a real problem. I mean, like just go look at any public repository of mine and watch the first like 10 commits be CI
testing.
Like it's a real thing. The problem I just think it's like a chicken and an egg of like things happen in the environment of CI that are causes, right? So like when you like, I think that's what ended up happening, because the runner originally had this like GitLab runner execute like enter basically, and it like tried to run your CI pipeline locally. But I think we ended up deprecating that because just the differences in the environment just were like unmaintainable. Again, I'm trying to find this. I'm stalling for time as I'm trying to find this thing that Michael said today. So no, you're not crazy. You're not alone. Again, many of my GitLab CI YAMLs look very similar, or GitLab Git commit histories on a new repository look terrible. Where was this? I thought it was today. Yeah, so I'm just going to share this like thread on it today that I thought had a lot of great thoughts.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
About it, including my colleague Michael, who had some thoughts on GitLab specifically. Again, I don't think it's like you'll find in this thread the answer, right? But just some different ways to think about how to debug that. I mean, I do like the thing I like about GitLab CI, although this could be true of GitHub Actions too. It's like you're theoretically just automating the, CLI, like the pipeline that you're running on your laptop. But we all know that just doesn't work out in the long run. Yeah. I do like, so the one thing I do like doing is I like composing my own Docker images to build inside of, to just give myself some more control. I feel like that gives me, now I kind of can get a lot closer. So I there's an article I read about that, actually. Let me put that in there too. Like I like having my own Docker image for it, because then I can run that Docker image on my computer, right? And run the commands inside that Docker image. And now I'm like, okay, I've abstracted away some of it, right? I know that the CI environment is going to get a fresh copy of this Docker image. Again, I don't think it's the panacea that solves all these problems, but it is one pattern that I do like doing, to like make sure the build dependencies are ones that I know what they're doing. Just like, again, I keep giving myself away as a horrible Node developer, just like NPM installing 1,000 Node modules, and then like you've got all this cruff and you have no idea what's going on. Like the same thing happens when you grab a random image off Docker Hub and like start trying to build inside of it.
Yep.
So you're not alone. It's not you. It's us. By us, I mean the entire tech industry.
So I'm kind of curious from the audience. Anybody want to volunteer what tools they're using right now? I'm kind of curious for like a quick ad hoc poll. I know everyone's got their cameras on, so I can't ask you to raise your hand, but you can click the little reaction button on Zoom. Maybe can we get a raise a hand if you're currently using GitLab in some capacity at your organization right now? Go ahead and hit the reaction button or turn on your camera. All right, we got a couple. 3, 4, 5. That's pretty big. Okay. How many folks are using Jenkins for their pipelines? 1, 2, 3. Okay, cool. I am happy to see Jenkins get such a low number. I'm really happy about that. Anybody using AWS Code Services, Code Pipeline, Code Build, anything like that? Nobody.
How about Azure DevOps?
Azure DevOps? Anybody using Azure DevOps? Nobody using Azure DevOps. Anybody using GitHub Actions? Richard's using GitHub Actions. How about Circle CI or Travis? I'm just throwing those in one lump. 1, 2, 3. Okay, all right. Cool, so there you go. You got an ad hoc survey, Brandon, from...
Brendan, a nice thing about that, I think if you total it up, I think you hit about 80% of folks are using CI/CD. So
yeah.
I mean, that's a good thing, right? Like, I mean, that's the most important thing.
Wait, that's a good question. I should ask. How many people are just logging into servers like a savage and doing deployments manually? Anybody want to raise?
No one's going to raise their hand and admit that case.
Harlan.
Oh, there we go. Like,
hi, Harlan.
like
I know you don't do that.
Hey, what that government contractor I talked about earlier? The first day I got handed a stack of paper, an 11-page Word document. Oh, you can't see with my fake background. 11-page Word document with the steps to install the app to a new environment that involved a lot of SSHing. And like, I think at the end of my first week, I had all my engineers together and I said, okay, so the goal of our team is that Brendan is never going to SSH into a box again. Go do that. That's the goal.
Yes, that's a good goal.
Seems so simple.
Sorry, Carson, you're right. I forgot about Bitbucket. Any Bitbucket users out there? Yeah, we got one.
Crickets.
Does Bitbucket have a CI?
Yeah, Bitbucket pipelines.
There's Bitbucket pipelines. I mean, Atlassian had Bamboo, so I used to use Atlassian Bamboo for a while.
Bitbucket is so bad as just a source repository. I can't imagine how its CI service goes.
They morph the Bamboo in. Are they morphing Bamboo into it, Brendan?
No, I think they're completely separate, much like Jira Server and Jira Cloud. And I mean, like even more separate than that, actually. Bamboo pipeline, excuse me. Wow, I just confused it hard. Bamboo was one product, and then Bitbucket Pipelines is like a completely new. I mean, it's not that new, but it was like from scratch year's Bitbucket pipelines thing.
Yeah, it's gonna leave a bad taste in my mouth if they tried to morph Bamboo and Bitbucket together. So
Yeah, I think they I think pipelines was their like Bamboo replacement, right? Like they weren't gonna do more development on Bamboo. They were gonna kind of like push people to pipelines.
Mhm.
Used to be a big Atlassian fanboy back in the day. Got the T-shirt, all that stuff. Before GitLab existed, is what I say when our CEO's around.
Nice. No tattoo though.
No tattoo, but because they have the T-shirt. Do you know about the Atlassian T-shirt?
No, it's a Atlassian t-shirt.
Well, if you can install, like this is probably gone now, but back in the day, if you could install Jira, Bitbucket, I don't know which, but their stack and get it all wired up, you could like prove it to them and get a T-shirt.
Nice. Okay. I like that. All right, guys. Anybody else have questions for Brendan? Brendan, really appreciate your time, but want to
yeah,
make
this is a
sure.
great presentation. Thank you, Brendan.
Any
Yeah,
other
thanks.
questions for Brendan?
Hey, Brendan, I have an off-topic question. This is probably an off-topic, but
Sure.
in regards to GitLab, like, do you have with the next version coming up, is there any plan on taking auto DevOps out of the scope, out of the premium, getting into something more of a isolated?
That's a good question. You mean like bringing it down in tier?
Yeah.
So yes. So the short answer is yes. So auto DevOps now is like composed of a lot of different things. So let me just share my screen real quick, because the short answer is yes. Things are moving down tier with that. Yeah, I know. Okay, just give me the auto DevOps template. So auto DevOps is now composable. So if we look down here at the bottom, it's just including a number of different templates. And so like each of these things is separate now. So license scanning, SAST for static code analysis, performance, et cetera, is composable. And a big chunk of these things are actually available in the open source version of GitLab. So like they're not even in premium.
Wow.
So it's by feature, right? So like auto DevOps, we would say is in the open source. Now, the full power of auto DevOps, like for instance, license scanning, well, that's in our top tier because that's like, or dependency scanning rather, is like in our top tier. That's the company that we purchased, Gymnasium, and that's got all the like people behind it that are tracking CVEs and all that stuff, right? Like that's in our paid version, sure. But SAST, like secure static code analysis, either is now or is moving down to open source, because what that's really doing is wrapping the best of open source static code analysis, right? So for our stewardship of open source, we feel like, okay, that should be in our open source version, since we're not bringing a lot of proprietary stuff to that. So it depends. So the answer is yes, but it depends, because given the feature, there may be a different path. We recently announced 18 additional things that we're moving to open source. And I'll find that thing, because we really, our CEO is really very serious about what he calls buyer-based core. And so the idea is that the things that are in our paid tiers should be valuable to who would buy at that level, right? And like our most expensive level, well, that's going to be like a VP director level purchase. So that needs to be things that are valuable to that kind of person. Things that are valuable to every developer, or the developer values should be in the open source version. He's very serious about that. So if you had more specific like features in there, it may vary, right? But in general, we want the entire life cycle to be in open source, and then just the things that are more valuable to people that can have the budget for it are the things that are in the paid version.
Gotcha. That was very useful. Thank you.
Well, Casey, I got a lot from this. Thank you, Brendan. This was a great presentation. Thank you again for staying up late for us.
Yeah, no problem. And I think I put a bunch of links in the Zoom chat, but if I missed anything, like all the projects I showed should be public. Let me just put one last link to the project that we actually built.
Is your
Here.
Twitter handle, is that the best way to reach out to you if anybody wants to engage with you?
Yes, O'Leary Crew on Twitter. That's like the easiest. My DMs are open, and like if you need to just hit me up there, real quick.
I'm gonna grab a bunch of these links and drop them in our chat, our Slack.
Yes, thank you, because I was not a good Meetup goer and did not join the Slack yet. So thank you, Casey. So yeah, thanks everybody. This is a great group.
All right, well, we'll see you next month. Next month. Thank you, everybody.
All right, see y'all next month. We got to talk on Dynamo. Be safe. See you next time.
Take care. Stay safe.